No, we gotta start on the front, bro. Get the hard shit out of the way. Alright. So on today's vlog episode, we've got Matt, what year is this truck?
2012.
2012 Ford F-150. And we are doing shocks
slash leveling kit.
Shocks slash leveling kit on it. So, that's what we're doing today. Let's take a look at how this goes. Alright everybody, welcome to our how-to on installing Bilstein 5100 shocks and leveling kit onto a 2012 Ford F-150. Like I said, this is a leveling kit and a all four-corner shock kit, so I'll link it below, the Amazon link, if you guys want to go on and buy it. If you do have a newer Ford F-150, we're doing this in a shop with no lift, so this is all floor jack, etc. So as you can see, we're going to start by jacking up the front end here and putting a jack stand underneath it to secure it, just so we're safe. And then the first thing we'll do obviously is remove lug nuts and get the wheel off the corner that we are working on. Now we are using some air tools here. As you can see, we're using an impact to get the lug nuts off, and we'll use an impact on some of the other stuff, but other than that, all basic hand tools we're using here. So first thing after we get the tire off, we're going to want to take the lower tie rod, the tie rod out of the hub here. So again, impact on, nut off, and then you're going to want to, hopefully it'll slide out. If you're lucky, it will slide right out. If you're unlucky like we were, it was a little bit stuck. We do live in Michigan, so we're used to rust and stuff. Now, you're going to want to beat on the tie rod a little bit. Now you can beat on the lower part, but you have to be very careful about it, because as you can see here, I mushroomed it out and I can't get the nut back on it. Where you really want to beat is right here on the hub, and the hubs are pretty robust, so you're not going to hurt it beating on it most of the time. And another thing you can do, if you're beating on the hub and it still isn't letting the tie rod pop out, you can put a little lubrication like we're doing here. We use a product called Nuts Off, which works pretty well. You can use WD-40, pretty much any penetrating lube you can use on it. And then again, just beat on it with a hammer a little more. It will eventually come out and come loose. It took us a little while here, but we did eventually get it out. So the next thing after that would be to remove the lower tie rod end that's on the lower A-arm, so that you'll have more flex once you do get the rest of the parts off. And then as you can see here, we're taking the bolt out of the lower strut mount. Now this bolt's torqued to like 300 foot-pounds, so it took us a huge breaker bar and a cheater bar and everything to get it loose, and then we just popped it the rest of the way out there, as you can see. After that, upper ball joint you're going to want to remove and pull out of there so that the hub is free. And then the last thing, like we're doing here, is removing the upper strut mounts. Now these upper strut mounts are pretty easy to get to from the top. As you can see here, we're doing the driver's side. That was a little trickier. We did have to use a universal joint on the end of the extension. The passenger side was a lot easier. It was pretty much a straight shot in there. You can also reach them from the wheel well, but going in from the top and using the impact guns makes things a whole lot easier on you. If you have an electric impact like we're using here, it's almost like cheating pretty much. So like I said, you're going to take those 3 bolts off the top. Once you take those off, everything should be loose. A little bit of persuasion here, as you can see, and we're going to pop the strut right out of the lower arm here. And 3, 2, 1, boom, and it falls out. So now we've got our first strut out, so we can start the disassembly of the strut. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to take a Sharpie, and as you can see here, we're about to point to it. We're going to mark our spring as well as our spring cups. So that way we can line everything up nice and even, just where it's supposed to be, once we reassemble this later. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to get out our spring compressors. Now spring compressors are pretty dangerous, so as you can see, we've put on safety glasses now. And the spring compressors, you want to be completely opposite of each other, so 180 degrees off. If you don't have spring compressors, you can rent them from any parts store, O'Reilly's, Advanced, whatever. And then once you do get your spring compressors on and snug down here, next thing to do is to tighten them up and really compress the spring. Now be very careful doing this. This is a lot of tension that all wants to come apart and kill you. As you can see, we're going one side then the other, one side then the other, and this is what you want to do in order to make sure you don't accidentally have a spring pop off on you. Now at the end here, we need to take the final nut off the top of the strut here, which is holding the upper spring cup on. Now when we tried to do that, the shaft started spinning. A little cheat code to be able to get the shock shaft not to spin: loosen up your spring compressor a little bit on each side, just so you put a small amount of tension on the top shaft of the shock, and then that way you'll be able to use the impact and boom, pop that top nut right off, and then you'll be good to go. So as you can see here, this is us just loosening up those springs just a little bit so that we can get the nut off of the upper spring cup here so the shock shaft doesn't spin. Now once everything's off, you're going to have to get the lower spring holder off. So you can see here we used a hammer, tapped it pretty lightly, got this thing off pretty easily. And now what we're going to do is go over and read the manual actually for our shocks. Now the fronts are a leveling kit, but there's different places you can put the clips, so we want to make sure we put the clip in the right spot, hence the reason we read the directions while we do it. And once we figure that out, then we get the shock here, and as you can see, Matt's just putting the clip around the ring that we need to, so we have the proper ride height. And then once we have the proper ride height, the clip in the place for the proper ride height, we're going to put our little mount thing they included, and then our lower spring mount on there. After we get the lower spring mount on, then we're going to add a little lubrication to the shaft here, because we do have a couple tight fitting. Here's a rubber grommet that goes on there that came off the old shock. And then we're also going to put our bump stop on there. So you can see Matt sliding it over right now. And then once all that's on there, we can go ahead and take the shock and slide it in the spring. Again, making sure to line up those marks we put on with the Sharpie here, especially on the lower part where it could have changed. Once that's all on, upper spring nut goes on, or upper shock nut, I'm sorry, which holds the cap on here. Now you want to make sure you get this nice and tight, and then once it's nice and tight, you can go ahead and remove your spring compressors. Now they need to be removed the same way they were installed, slowly loosening each side, alternating back and forth, so that way nothing flies off and kills you. Now there are torque specs for all this stuff you can look up, but tight is pretty much what you want to be. Once you get that stuff all assembled like that, now we're just going to slide the whole strut assembly back in the truck. As you can see, we got stuck a little bit here, so we did take a hammer and we lightly tapped on the lower part of the strut. Again, I stress lightly tapped, just until it falls in the arm here. Then we're going to install our lower shock bolt. We're gonna put that in, again, just hand tight, just so it's in there. Once that's in there, we're gonna get our jack out. We're gonna jack up on the lower A-arm so we can get our upper strut mount bolts in place here. Now again, this will take a little finagling. It won't be perfect, but you can get it. Once that's done, get a friend to help you push down on the upper control arms so you can get the upper control arm in place back in the hub with the nut, again, loosely on. Then you're going to want to start tightening stuff down. You'll tighten down the upper, the lower strut mounts. You'll tighten your upper ball joint. The last things you'll want to do is put the tie rod in and tighten that down. And then your sway bar link, you're going to want to reassemble that onto your lower control arm and then tighten that down. And then once you do all that, then you're set. Put your wheel back on, put that side down, move over to the next side. And then you're just going to repeat the whole process on the opposite side. And then once you do that, your front is all finished. So then we move on to the rear. Now the rear is super easy. The shocks are externally mounted, so again, we'll jack it up. We'll secure the truck on jack stands with on the rear end housing. We'll take the lower shock mount out first, and then we'll remove the bolt on the upper shock mount for the rear, and then the rear shock will basically just slide right out, as you'll see here in a second. It's pretty easy. Now the new shocks come wrapped in a tie wrap that is actually holding them compressed, so don't cut that tie wrap. Make sure you leave it on, because if the shock decompresses, you won't be able to get it in and get it in place. So as you can see, we've got the lower mount bolt out. We'll take the upper mount bolt out really quick, and then boom, shock slides right out. No problem at all. So like I said, we'll take our new shocks that are tie wrapped, leave the tie wraps on them. We'll slide the new shock in here, upper and lower position. Again, just slide the bolts in. You don't have to tighten them down right away. Make sure you get both bolts in place, and then you're going to want to tighten them down after that. Again, there's a torque spec for that. I don't know it right offhand. You can look it up online. Google's a great tool for that kind of stuff. You're going to want to tighten them down. Once you tighten them down, again, I would suggest in the rear doing one side at a time. And once everything is in place, tightened down, snugged up, good to go, put your wheels back on, lower the rear end of your truck, and then voila, you should be done. Now, if you did adjust the front ride height to level it up, you might want to consider going and getting an alignment where it doesn't change the angle of the tires a lot, it does change them a little bit. So alignments are always good. I suggest an alignment every 2 years, especially if you live in Michigan. Now, that's pretty much it. That's how simple it was. We accomplished this in about, I want to say 5 hours on a Saturday afternoon, but that's with 3 dudes and 2 of us really knowing what we're doing. So thanks for tuning in to this DIY. We will see everybody next time around. Don't forget, links in the description to the Amazon if you want to purchase these shocks for your truck. It's a great kit, and we will see everybody on the next DIY.